Right, so hi. As I said, we're going to go ahead and explain the entire structure of how APDs, that is Asian Parliamentary Debates, work. It should be fairly easy to grasp. Also, absolute kudos to Niharika. You're gonna love the slideshow. It's so pretty. I'm sure you're going to be interested in learning about more things in the first place. Next slide, Niharika. Right. So parliamentary debates can basically be divided into two major parts. One is Asian Parliamentary Debate (APD), and the second is British Parliamentary Debate (BPD). At Chronicle, you're going to go ahead and participate in both formats itself. Gambit, which is the freshers comp, it's going to be APD. So we're going to go ahead and explain APD structure and everything that's a prerequisite for the same structure first. But we will go ahead and explain BPD to you later on as well. We do both, so it's not an issue whatsoever. Next slide. Right. So the first thing that we're going to explain is the structure that is present in the debate, so you know how the debate works and what is the flow of it. Secondarily, we're going to go and say how exactly these speeches look like or what exactly you're supposed to include in your particular speeches. Third, we have some understanding of what reply speeches is. Next slide. Right. So, what exactly are APDs? Just like your normal standard debates itself, there is going to be someone who is for the motion, but here that side is known as the government or the proposition. And second, you have someone who's going to go against the motion inherently, and that side is opposition. The difference between a normal debate, which is like a 1v1, and an APD is that each team is supposed to have three members, which means you have three members for proposition and you have three members for opposition as well. So on government, the three members are PM, Prime Minister, DPM, which is Deputy Prime Minister, and thirdly, you have the government whip. On opposition, you have Leader of Opposition, LO, Deputy Leader of Opposition, who's the DLO, and Opposition whip as well. Next slide. Great. So, as we said, the flow of the debate as well, right? So, in a classic 1v1, what happens is that someone from government bench or proposition goes ahead and speaks first, and then there is someone from opposition. We have the same understanding here, which means PM would have the first speech, followed by LO, followed by DPM, then DLO, and respectively Gov Whip and Op Whip as well. But the minor difference that then happens is that instead of having government reply speech, so there's basically something known as a reply speech that happens after three constructive speeches are received from both benches itself. So for the reply speech, instead of going government reply first, you go ahead and you take opposition reply and then you take government reply. So basically, government gets the first speech and the last speech. Next slide. Great. How exactly does the debate function? Basically, in an APD, you get three motions, which means the adjudicator or the judge is going to go ahead and give you three motions, and it is up to you to rank those motions as well. You get a total of 30 minutes after you receive the motions, 5 minutes of which you're supposed to spend on rankings. After the ranking is done, you get around 25 minutes of preparation time. After you go ahead and you complete your prep, you come back and you give your speeches in the same order that we just mentioned, but also understand each speech is supposed to be of 7 minutes and 15 seconds, but a reply speech is going to be of 4 minutes, which means anything that you say after 7 minutes and 15 seconds for the constructive speeches or anything that you say after 4 minutes and 15 seconds does not get noted, which means the adjudicator or the judge does not make a note of it. So it's a good practice to go ahead end by this particular time. Next slide, please, Niharika. Right. So, because we told you there's going to be three motions, and this does not happen in a normal 1v1, right? In an APD, you go ahead and you have three motions. So, you have some motion one, motion two, and motion three. And each team, that is government team or opposition team, then goes ahead and ranks those motions according to their preference, which means you will have a motion that you will prefer more and you will have a motion that you will absolutely not want to debate. The motion that you absolutely don't want to debate, you then go ahead and veto, and the motion that you want to debate on absolutely is going to be your preferred motion, that is your motion preference. So the way that you then go ahead and rank it, let's say the first motion one is something like this: how would ban cigarettes. The second motion two is let's say something like this house supports feminism, and let's say motion 3 is like something like this house would ban advertisement. I think then, as gov bench, if you want to debate on feminism and that is your priority, you go ahead and you give the preference to motion 2. And if you don't want to debate on like banning advertisements, you go ahead and you veto motion 3. So how does ranking work then? Because both of the teams are going to have different rankings, obviously. I think in scenario 1, you see that the motion preference, which is 1, is the same, and the motion veto is also the same. In this case, and you go ahead and you debate on the preferred motion because the preference matches and the veto matches as well. In scenario 2, you see that the vetoes are different. Government has vetoed 2 and opposition has vetoed 3. But you go ahead and you debate on motion 1 because here the vetoes don't matter because the preferred motion is the same. Now in scenario 3, you have different vetoes, which means government has vetoed motion 3 and opposition has vetoed motion 1, but here the preferences are different as well. In this case, you have a process of cancellation, which means you cannot debate motion 3 because one team has voted it, and you cannot debate motion 1 because another team has vetoed it. So you go ahead and you debate the only motion which has not like been vetoed, which is motion 2. In scenario 4, you have like the same vetoes but different preferences, which means both teams had like gone ahead and like vetoed motion 3, but they have different preferences. Gov prefers 1 and op prefers 2. In that case, you go ahead and you have a coin toss, and whoever wins the toss gets to debate on like the preferred motion that they want. Next slide, please. Right. Now, within your speech, there is also going to be a concept of POI, or a point of information, which means while you are giving your 7-minute speech, like speakers from the other team are allowed to go ahead and raise a POI, which can be a question, a call out, but also some sort of a clarification or a rebuttal. It like has to be in a 15-second limit. If it's crossing beyond 15 seconds, you can go ahead and like interrupt the speaker and simply move on with your speech. Rules for POIs are simple. It has to be between the first and the sixth minute of your speech. Like anything other than that is protected time, and your reply speech is also protected time. Which means if someone from the other team wants to go ahead and like ask you some sort of a POI, it has to be between the first minute and the sixth minute of like the top three speeches itself. But also, secondarily, it is important for you to go ahead and take POIs itself because engagement is very important. In fact, adjudicators do consider how much you're engaging or how well you're engaging when they like go ahead and decide who wins the debate itself. Right, next slide, please. Constructive speeches. So you have PM speech first. So before Smith takes over, is there like any kind of question regarding the structure itself that we just explained to you? If any, just go ahead and like raise your hand. Cool. I'm seeing none. Smith, you can simply go ahead and take over. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you, Aditya. You right. Now moving to the first constructive speech.
Lol, right, no worries. Until Smith is back. Um, does anyone like genuinely have any questions? Because I do understand this is a lot to digest. This is very different from the classic 1v1 that you all have like probably done in school. But also, right, Debangana, go ahead.
Could you re-explain the POI part once again?
Sure, no worries. So what happens is when you're going ahead and giving your speech, let's say you are PM, okay? But like someone from the opposition bench wants to go ahead and question you because they have some sort of a doubt regarding your speech itself. That can be a clarification, that can be a question, etc. So you have to be between the first minute and the sixth minute of your speech for them to be able to go ahead and ask your question. So let's say it's an online setting, you are talking and it's like the second minute. The other team can go ahead and raise their hand online in the Google Meet itself. They can text in the chat writing POI, or they can also go ahead and verbalize that POI, which means they unmute and they say POI, waiting for you to take the POI itself. Note that they have to keep the POI between like 15 seconds. Otherwise, you can go ahead and interrupt them and simply cut off their POI because it inherently wastes your time a little as well, right? It is good practice to go ahead and take POIs because it means better engagement but also better case understanding on both sides of the benches. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great, no worries. Prayukta, you had a question as well.
Yeah, sorry for the inconvenience. I just joined right now due to some unavoidable circumstances.
Right.
Before POI, what of the other points since I joined late? Is there any way I can know about all those points, or will there be any video to be shared?
Right, yes. This video is currently being recorded, which means we are uploading it on our YouTube. So you can go ahead and like refer to that. But also we will share the slide with you, which means you can simply go ahead and refer to that. So no worries whatsoever. Like you will
Was
understand.
there?
Right, right. Let me just recap it real quick for you, right? So there are two teams, Gov and Op, and each team has three speakers. These speakers are known as Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and Opposition Whip on government. And they are known as Leader of Opposition, Deputy Leader of Opposition, and Opposition Whip on the opposition bench itself. You will be able to understand how this debate flows or how exactly these people are like then expected to go and fulfill their role and give speeches the moment Smith comes back and goes ahead with like explaining what PM is. So don't worry because in this particular meeting itself you'll get a better idea. So just like hang on. Cool. Smith, are you here now?
Yes. Sorry
Great.
that
Take
a
over.
sudden surprise hostel checking.
No worries, just take over.
Yes. Hello. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, we can.
All right. Now moving on to the first constructive speech. That is for the government side, PM or the Prime Minister or LO, the leader of opposition. So as Alithya said, the first speech in APD is the Prime Minister's speech. Now let's understand what Prime Minister particularly does in this speech. So
Right. I think there is some sort of an issue with Smith's network. Until then, there are like other people who go as PM as well. Debargo or Udichi, if any of you are currently able to explain, please go ahead. Udichi, are you here?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Great.
Hi, and Udichi will be doing it.
Great, no worries. Udichi, please take over.
Oh yeah, of course. Hi everyone, Udichi this side. I usually go as the first speaker. So I'll just give you the basics so you know you don't exactly get overwhelmed with what's happening. Hopefully I'm audible to everyone. Cool. So basically what happens is that as the first speaker, like when you go PM or Prime Minister, right? You are basically setting the stage for the debate. You're basically setting the case. You're setting the CARAC, right? I'll get to CARAC later, but what does you set the context of the debate, you go ahead and clarify what stance you're going for, and you go ahead and define what your motion is, what exactly you're supporting, or you know what exactly you'll be talking about in your speech, right? So when you go ahead and set the basic context, you need to realize that the ad in general or the judge in general is viewed as an average voter. That means they do not have any specialized knowledge as such. So you will need to go ahead and clarify certain keywords that are present in the motion or perhaps in the info slide that is provided to you with the motion, right? So again, there are different types of motions, which again, there will be further sessions that will be held. So you'll be able to talk about policy motion, this house believes that, like, value judgment motions, etc., etc. So accordingly, if for example there is a certain policy motion in which you have to make a policy or a model or a law perhaps that would best help your case, then as the PM you go ahead and state that policy and you explain why you're using that policy, right? But more on that later. And after the PM, of course, it's the LO, the leader of opposition. They have again the LO as well. They
Udichi.
go, yeah.
Hi, hi. I think Smith is finally here. Is your internet fixed, bro?
Thank you, great.
Thank you so
Hi,
much, Udichi.
thank you so much, Udit.
cool. Smith, hello बोल दो तुम.
Perfect. Uh, right. So as Uditi has already said, what PM does, what LO has to do is interact with the case of government sites, that is with the PM speech. Whatever their case is, they have to rebut it. Rebut or rebuttal means you have to tell why whatever they are proving or they are bringing onto this debate, and whatever you are bringing onto this debate, why your case, why your definitions, and why your side of the world is better. As Udichi mentioned, there are some policies motion. So you can either give counter policies or you can just interact whatever case they are giving, whatever frame or whatever interaction they are having with this particular motion. You have to now characterize what the opposition side's stance is as opposition. So yeah, that's basically what leader of opposition gives. Also, a point to add in prime minister that if you want to give pre-buttals basically means to already interact with your opposition's case. For example, they may come and say this particular thing, but we already have this sorted or we already have this in a better way in our case. So that what pre-buttals are. I guess PM and PM and LO is over. Any doubts on this?
Right. Seeing none, I'll just like quickly go ahead and like summarize it for you. PM again, first speaker goes ahead and like sets up the debate, sets up the context for it as well. We go ahead and we call this something known as framing, but also characterization. You then go ahead and give charac for different kinds of motion that you receive, but also there is a concept known as burden fulfillment, which is different for every single motion burden or motion type, and that is like going to be explained to you in the very next session itself. So that is not an issue whatsoever. The only difference that then exists for LO is that you go ahead and you give certain sort of rebuttals to PM case, or you go ahead and you either accept or reject the particular definitions. I think Udichi and Smith explained this to like a pretty good extent as well, and you will get further clarity. Right, Shreya, go ahead.
They mentioned world. What does world mean here?
Right, good question. So what happens is that you get a particular motion, okay? In that motion, there is going to be some sort of a binary. What I mean by a binary is that there has to be some paradigm or some understanding on government that is explicitly different from that exists on opposition. So even if I say this house would ban cigarettes, you have a different world or a different understanding or framing that you need to give to prove why banning cigarettes is A good but also B important, and C what is the solution or the solvency and how does it impact your world in a better way. So you have to go and talk about a world. So what you go ahead as you imagine this as a different setting altogether. On opposition, you operate on status quo. Status quo means that you are operating in the current paradigm itself. So in the present model that already exists. So you go ahead and you talk about why people are influenced like with cigarettes, etc. Why do you think banning itself would not work? You can go ahead and like give a, like a counterfactual or a counter policy, which basically means you're going to go ahead and give a different understanding where you talk about why you should probably not ban cigarettes but do another XYZ thing. So setting the understanding or setting the paradigm itself is called showing what your world looks like. Does that clear it for you? Great.
Yes,
No,
yes.
yeah, I do get that it's a little bit complicated, but don't worry. With more sessions, with more mocks, you're going to understand it fairly easily. Not an issue. Niharika, next slide, please. Great. Deep. Oh, huh. Great, DPM or the Deputy Prime Minister. Majorly the role I go, I love going DPM, right? Understand what exactly happens. DPM is inherently the second speaker and DLO is the fourth speaker. So what you do is you go ahead and rebut the arguments of the previous speaker. Rebut basically means you deconstruct the argument of your previous speaker, who now happens to be LO or leader of opposition because you're going DPM, right? So you talk about why exactly that particular constructive does not work, or what is the inherent flaw that exists within that, and why that's absolutely wrong, why you're better off, etc. So you go ahead and you deconstruct and disprove it. That is like a concept that you have when it comes to rebutting. Second, you go ahead and you rebuild the same arguments of your prime minister, but this does not look like repeating whatever your prime minister said. You're supposed to go ahead and further your case, which means you must have some sort of an idea or some sort of a concept that you need to run through your debate to prove why your world or why your side is better off, why it has significantly better impacts, or why is it simply good. I think to do all of that, you need to further your case by providing additional arguments or additional logical argumentation itself, but you also build upon whatever your PM said, because PM goes ahead and spends a lot of time on framing the world for the debate, or even talking about how exactly the world functions itself. It is up to you to build upon whatever arguments they're given, which means you go ahead and you're impacting and you're showing how the impact reflects on the world and prove why that impact is the most likely thing to happen. And because it is the most likely thing to happen, it gives you some sort of a benefit. So you go ahead and you talk about how exactly you're generating the benefit. If you are able to do that, you inherently win the debate. But also remember how we told you that leader of opposition is able to challenge the prime minister's definition or the prime minister's setting of the world itself. Which means if there is any sort of definitional challenge that ends up happening on leader of opposition side. So let's go back to this house would ban cigarettes, right? If LO comes and tells you that hi, I don't think you're correct when you're assuming that people want to, let's say, um, stop smoking cigarettes, etc., because there is concepts of peer pressure, but also everyone is so normalized to it that even if you ban cigarettes, there is a good likelihood that people will not want to leave it, etc., etc. While this is some sort of a logical argumentation, there is also a setting that exists of things like peer pressure probably existing. I think then DPM can go ahead and prove why peer pressure is not as important or not as influential as the other things that prime minister has already gone and spoken about, which means you have to disprove claims or disprove settings of the LO itself and prove why your setting or why your assumption of what the world looks like is way more likely. So if you're talking about, let's say, a feminist motion where you're talking about why feminism is important as a movement, maybe prime minister sets it in this developing world and developing countries, etc. Maybe LO comes and sets that in a developed country, let's say something which looks similar to the United States of America, etc. Then DPM can come and prove why exactly the debate should still operate in a developing country itself and why it's so important for the judge to understand that. I think that's majorly it on DPM, but also DLO is quite similar as the DPM as well. There isn't really that much of a difference. You just go ahead and interact with the case of the government as well and interact with the points that has already been given by the DPM. That's inherently it. There is also another concept that exists known as mechanization, which means when you're talking about logical argumentation, you tell me why it is functioning, how it is functioning in that way, and why is it happening. When you're talking about why feminist movements are important and you need more people to subscribe to it, you possibly go and say there are some people that believe in the concept of feminism and some people who don't care about feminism, but majority of the people are these fend setters who don't really care much about it. I think then you go ahead and mechanize why it's important for you to advertise, movements like feminism, so that these fence setters know what feminism is, know that it's something good, and then buy into your movement. That is basically what simple, very basic mechanization looks like on a superficial level. Again, you will understand this with more experience. Sanskriti, you can take on. Next slide, Niharika.
Hello guys, Sanskriti this side. Okay, so whip speakers. Brief note on whips. First of all, what are whips and where a whip stands in a debate? Whip speaker is the last constructive speaker in an Asian parliamentary debate, which means that when both the sides have already made their arguments, then is the time when a whip comes in. So, what does a whip do? As a whip, you're not allowed to present any new arguments, which means that if you make a very fresh argument or if you make a new argument, it does not get credited by the adjudicator, which means that it's like basically no point of making a new argument in general. Understand that that does not mean that your speeches get limited. Okay, what you can still do is bring in new examples, bring in new analysis and new rebuttals of the arguments that have already been made by your previous speakers, which means that even though you are not allowed to bring in new arguments, you can still fill in the gaps and make your case look flawless by giving new analysis and examples of the arguments which have been already made, right? So now what exactly is a whip's job, right? So as a whip, your responsibility is to show exactly how your team takes the debate. Your role is to convince the adjudicator that the points made by your team still stands and matter more than the opposition's case. The whip functions almost like an biased adjudicator for their side. Okay, like you explain the debate from your team's perspective, highlighting loopholes or perhaps weakness in the opposition's case, while clearly demonstrating why your team's argument remains strong, more relevant, realistic, and more impactful in a very positive way. Now, instead of adding new material, the whip weighs and compares, which I'll be explaining to you further in my further speech. But you show not just what was said, but why your arguments win the debate. Okay. Your role is not repeating what your previous speaker said, but explaining to you why you win this debate as a whole by proving why your arguments are more well explained, more realistic, and more important than the opposition, whatever opposition offers. Now, how exactly do you do that, right? For A, you briefly summarize your case. What does that mean? At the start of a whip speech, you should spend less than a minute reminding the adjudicator what were the main points your team made, right? This helps the judge remember what your team brought to the debate. This short summary gives you a base to work from, which means once your team's points are clear in the judge's mind, it becomes easier for you to compare other teams' arguments with yours and show where they are weaker. It's easier for you to do comparison and show why your arguments stands and why your case is way better. It particularly gives you a base to start from. Second of all, prioritizing your most important arguments. As a whip, that's a very important part. In a debate, many arguments are made by both the teams, right? As a whip, your job is to pick out the most important points from all of this. You do not need to talk about everything that was said. In fact, it's not possible for you to do that. Instead, you must choose the most important ones, the key issues, the main themes that really decide the debate, or which you think is important in that particular debate, right? This step is very important. Again, why? If you choose arguments that are not important, the rest of your speech will not matter because your whole whip speech depends on the picking, on picking the right clash points, on picking the right arguments, and picking the right points around which the debate really revolved, right? So, picking the right arguments is very important as a whip. When choosing these clash points or arguments, try to be more fair and objective, right? Clearly understand what the other team actually argued and then compare it with your team's case. This helps the judge, trust your analysis more and make your comparisons look way more stronger than the opposition's case, right? Now, what weighing looks like. I talked about how you need to pick important arguments and important clashes, but how do you do that, right? Now, weighing is how a whip explains which argument matters more in deciding the debate. In most of the debates, both teams will prove a lot of good points, right? The whip's job is not to say that, the opposition is wrong or their point is not valid. That's not how things work. But you have to go ahead and show that your team's points are more important, are more bigger, or more impactful, right? Now, how do you go ahead and compare arguments? So it's done on some particular factors, right? So I'll give you three factors here: impacts, importance, and likelihood. Impacts. So what does impacting means? Which means it means that how many people are getting affected, and how much is the harm and how much is the good. Which means that is there a lot of harm, is there, or is there a lot of good in that particular argument? How many people are getting affected because of that particular point? So impacting comes under how many people getting affected and how big is the harm or how big is the good. Importance, which argument is more relevant to the debate, right? So a lot of times people make arguments which are perhaps not very relevant to the motion or not very relevant to the topic. You are not supposed to focus on that argument. You're supposed to focus on the argument which is more relevant to the motion, right? Likelihood, which outcome is more realistic. You have to focus on real world behavior, practicality. You have to focus on a realistic case rather than a very idealistic case, right? If that argument is more realistic, there is more chances of it happening. It's more practical. That makes the argument, it gives the argument more weightage, which means that argument is more important and that needs to be countered, right? So coming to rebuttals and analyzing the arguments. What rebutting looks like. As a whip, rebutting means showing why opposition's argument do not stand anymore. And second of all, pointing out gaps and assumptions in opposition's case. Right. Now, as a whip, you don't have to talk about all the points they present. You cannot do that because, opposition or the, opposite bench gives a lot of points and you cannot talk about all of it. Just the ones on which the debate revolved or you think can actually make an impact on the debate, which means as a whip, you need to talk about the points which can actually change the verdict of the debate, which were the main key points of this debate, which you can only understand through weighing, right? But also saying their argument is wrong doesn't make any difference. You have to go ahead and provide a proper mech as to how their points are already answered by your previous speakers, or you have to go ahead and prove that how their points were not well enough explained or not well enough mechanized or not or poorly explained for them to be credited, right? So rebutting as especially as a whip does not mean saying that the other team is wrong. It means explaining why the opposition's points do not stand anymore after your team has responded to them, right? You briefly state what the other team claimed, show how your side already answered it, and explain why that answer and your argument is enough to encounter the opposition's claim, right? Now, this is the largest part of your debate. Once you have identified the main points and arguments on which the debate revolved and major issues, you compare them with your arguments and show why yours is still better. Disregarding opposition's argument doesn't work, but you have to prove why your arguments are just way better, right? You can always use new examples, more analysis to to support your rebuttals. New carrot works too. You just have to go ahead and you know explain your rebuttals. Just not say that it's wrong and leave it. You have to explain as to why your point stands and it's better. So coming to how do you compare both the cases, right? Because you have to go ahead and show to the edge that your case is better than their case. So in these cases, what you can usually do is you can show exclusive benefits. Now, what does that mean, right?
these benefits which are just present in your case, right? It makes your case different. Basically, it's the advantages only your side delivers, and an opposition cannot provide a match. This makes it easier for the ads to see more benefits and advantages on your side. It makes it easier for them to decide who won the debate and how these benefits show that your case is more superior to theirs, because there are no exclusive benefits and you are clearly you know showing that what your case actually offers. So as a whip, your role is to remove confusion and paint a clearer picture for the edge to give you the win. That's it from my end. Any questions?
Can I add something?
Surely, surely.
हाँ संजीव, go ahead.
हाँ जी, हाँ जी. Yeah, while whipping, you can introduce certain metrics on which you can, tell that why the distinction between their case and your case is very exclusive or it's differentiated to still some extent, right? And again, you can do on the basis of more likelihood, more agency, like who has more agency upon this particular thing, meaning you have more utilitarian ground within the particular debate. And again, you have to tell that what this exclusive metric generally looks like. Basically, upon how much, like on sorry, yeah, on what metric you're winning this debate, on more scalability of magnitude, like people who are affecting it, more people who are vulnerable group that are already existing in that particular ambit of the debate. So you can introduce certain kind of metric on which the large scalability lies within the comparative analysis of that particular debate. So you can introduce a certain kind of metrics which helps to clear a more clearer picture for you to tell that, oh, on that very basis, on these very metrics, we simply take this debate.
Right, thank you so much. I think the only thing we have left right now is the reply speech, which Ananya will explain to you right now. And after that, we can go ahead and have a small Q&A, but also just like talk to you all to understand if you all got something out of this or not. Next slide, please, Niharika. Ananya, please take over.
Yeah, hi, am I audible?
Yeah, perfectly.
Great. Hi everyone, I'm Ananya. I'll be basically explaining what reply speeches are. The main role of reply speakers, right, is to give what is known as a biased adjudication, right? What that means is to analyze the debate to prove how the most critical issues have been addressed and justified by your bench, your side, or your team, and how other teams fail to address the core burdens of the debate. Burdens, as I guess has been already explained by Udichi, are basically the core or critical issues that need to be addressed in your debate, right? Now, so the main role of a reply speech is to convince the adjudicator, the person judging you, from their perspective, as in through means of their methods of analysis, as I think I already mentioned yesterday, right? How an adjudicator actually analyzes your debate. So, from their perspective, you try to convince the adjudicator that your side is the bench that should be winning the debate, right? Now, a reply speech can only be given by either of the first two speakers, mm, the first speaker or the second speaker, right? PM or DPM or LO or DLO, and not by the whip unless extremely extraordinary circumstances arise. And a reply speech also only lasts for 4 minutes with an additional 15 seconds to conclude. And it is also therefore scored on like half of the speaker score scale, which is like 0 to 40 in general, or the basic range which is followed is 35 to 40 or 41. Now, Alithia mentioned POIs, right? Point of informations. Now, POIs cannot be raised during reply speeches. That is, the entire duration of a reply speech accounts as protected time. Now, there might be a confusion between whip the role of a whip and the role of a reply of the person doing a reply speech, right? That was something that confused me for a very long time. So I'll try to break it down for you a little. So what your whip basically does, right, is to analyze the entire debate, right, to derive conclusive arguments to prove how your side should win. Uh, a whip speaker can give new rebuttals, new characterization. I think all of that has been very well covered by Sanskriti and Sanjeev.
But what happens in a reply speech, how a reply speech is inherently different, is how is that a reply speech is like the final stamp that your bench gives on your entire case, right? There are no new rebuttals, no new points. And what gives you a leverage in your reply speech, right, is to prove how the other bench's best case scenario is worse than your worst case scenario. I'll repeat this again. How your best case scenario is worse than your worst case scenario. It is not a mandate to analyze this perspective, but if you are actually able to prove that even in their best case, even when everything works in their way, that their world or how things are going to be in their world are going to be worse than what is going to be the world in after even your most favorable circumstances don't arise. When you give this analysis right, and when you give this analysis strongly, you're most likely going to win this debate. Again, it is not mandatory, but if you're successful in proving the same, and then you're very likely to win this debate. And reply speeches are very important even when there's no new material that is added, because when it is a very close debate, then if you're able to convince the adjudicator based on your convincing power, if you're able to convince them that your side is the side that should win, that heavily supports your entire debate. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Right, thank you so much. Just another thing. I think we did not tell you regarding how you're going to be marked if you go ahead and you do debate. In itself, the way that the scoring works is there is a scale, all right, for speakers itself, which means if you're debating, you can be marked from 67 to 83. 67 being the lowest and 83 being the highest itself. There is a scoring guide for that as well, which is present in the manual, which is the UADC manual. We will be sharing it with you as well after this particular session. Also, let's say you're adjudicating, which means you are judging. We're going to have another session for adjudicators itself, which mainly like Ananya will be handling. There as well, you have a scale of like 1 to 10, 10 being amazing and 1 being like absolutely abysmal. You don't really go ahead and give adjudicators 1 because they definitely deserve better. But right, yeah, that is how scoring works. Debarkya, you can like conclude the recording as well. And Neharika, you can stop screen sharing.